Hi and welcome to the recap of week 3 of NaNoWriMo. My goal this month is to edit 4 chapters of my current work in progress, which I'm calling Project Prehistory. I continued editing chapter 6 on Monday evening. The first scene of that chapter needed a lot of restructuring like I talked about in the previous vlog. On Tuesday, I finished editing the first scene and moved on to the second scene. The second scene had 2 parts, a lesson that I needed to condense a little and a longer conversation that I needed to change somewhat more. My most used resource in this phase of the edits, besides obviously Google, is the emotion thesaurus. In the previous vlog, I talked about how I have a lot of repeated action tags where the characters do the same thing several times in the book, and I'm trying to get rid of some of that repetition. The emotion thesaurus is a great resource for brainstorming what those other reactions might be. In this case, I had 2 occurrences where the characters are shrugging, almost back to back. I changed one to a much more suitable action, but I decided to keep the other one because I don't think my characters shrug too often. On Wednesday, I finished editing chapter 6. The end of scene 2 and scene 3 were easier than I had expected, so at that point I was half a week ahead of schedule. There were only minor changes I needed to make to the text in addition to sentence level edits, and since I had a good idea of what those changes should be, they were relatively easy to make. There was also a lot of text, which was fine already. And then I moved on to chapter 7. I read it on Wednesday evening. Chapter 7 is the chapter that needs the most revisions of all the chapters in the book. I'm changing the setting in scene 1 and it needed a lot of rewriting. Part of the dialogue can stay the same, but there was some repetition to what has already been said in chapter 5. Scene 2 is fine and it only needs a minor addition and some sentence level edits. But then the last 2 scenes of the chapter again require massive edits. That's because I changed the order of the scenes 3 and 4. I realized that the order of events makes a lot more sense if the chapter ends with a bigger finale. So now every scene in that chapter builds towards the last scene. But that obviously means that I need to change some of the dialogue and interior monologue to reflect the change in the order of the scenes. Now, the first scene turned out to be a struggle. I started editing it on Thursday. I don't usually do this, but this time I copy-pasted the first scene to a completely new file, so I could mess with it to my heart's content. Because I wanted to change the setting of the scene, I needed to rewrite quite a lot of the text. There was some dialogue in that scene that for the most part could stay the same, and I just needed to polish it up and get rid of any repetition. Now the rewrite of the beginning of the scene went well enough, but then I ran into a bit of trouble when I was trying to think of how I'm going to connect the new beginning to the existing dialogue. So I decided it was time to take a break and I went to the library. Now, one of my goals this year is to read more library books. I haven't visited a library in years, or specifically I have visited the university library to get non-fiction books, but I haven't visited the city library to get fiction books, because I've been trying to read my physical to-be-read pile of books that I own. But on Thursday I decided to walk to my closest library. The English book selection there is not huge. This is the majority of the young adult books they had, and there's also a section for adult fiction in English. I saw some interesting books, but as I'm still trying to get through the books that I own, I only decided to get one book. Now, one of the items in my book bingo this year is reading a graphic novel, and this is the book I had in mind when I set that goal. I wanted to read Mouse ever since it came out. I'll probably read it in May, and I don't think it will take me more than a day or two. And then I went plant shopping. I guess this is the sign that I'm officially middle-aged because I suddenly find myself caring about houseplants. Anyway, I've been eyeing this jade plant for a week or two and I bought it now. And then I noticed there was another plant which in English I think is called Chain of Hearts. It was on sale and it was only €2, so I thought I might take it as well. It looks a little miserable, but we'll see if I can keep it alive. Anyway, now my kitchen table is full of plants that I should find a proper place to. Now taking a break was a great idea. After I came home, I spent some time brainstorming and I came up with an idea how to continue the scene and how to connect it to the existing dialogue. But before I continued with the first scene of chapter 7, I turned to another project. My goal this month is also to edit 2 short stories. I edited one on the second week of Camp Nano, and on Friday of the third week it was time to start tackling the second short story. It's a contemporary fiction and it was more difficult than the urban fantasy one I edited last week. I had slight problems getting into the story and finding the character's voice, and I had a migraine coming, so I had a bit of a brain fog. I had hoped to edit at least half of the story, but that unfortunately didn't happen. But I did edit 1.5 scenes out of 5, which is about 1,500 words. There's 5,000 words in total, so I edited about 1/3 of the story. In the evening, I got back to Project Prehistory and continued with the first scene. And finally, after some struggles, I managed to connect the beginning of the scene and the existing dialogue. And then it was mostly smooth sailing. I only needed to polish the rest of the scene and make sure the action tags were relevant to the changed setting. I did that on Saturday, but as I still had a bit of a migraine, I did not continue to scene 2, so the rest of the chapter will have to wait for the next week. So at the moment I'm slightly ahead of schedule when it comes to editing Project Prehistory and slightly behind the schedule when it comes to editing the short stories. Considering that I expect chapter 7 to continue to be a difficult piece to edit, I think it's safe to say that week 4 of Camp NaNoWriMo will be full of more struggles, but I'll let you know how it went in my next vlog, so I'll see you then.